In the summer, we ran our drowning prevention series where we talked with stakeholders, industry experts, swim schools, and so on and so forth to really highlight, the risks and things that people have to pay attention to going into summer. And as we've learned, and as we should be aware of, water safety and drowning prevention is not a seasonal subject. These are things that we have to pay attention to all the time. Now, as we transition into the fall and winter, we're running our second episode in our water safety series. This episode, we talk with Eric Shendlemen from Shendy Swim School. Eric is a longtime water safety advocate, and he's very active in the community in terms of promoting water safety and risk awareness and so on and so forth. He brought a subject to my attention recently that I had no idea. I didn't have the terminology for it, and he put words to it: non-fatal drownings. Now, this was something that I had to look into and do my research before the episode. And when I did, I realized that it's much more of a severe problem than you may think. And furthermore, the scary part, the drowning prevention reports that talk about who drowned, who was saved, tell only a sliver of the story. The number of people that have to go to the hospital as a result of non-fatal drownings are significantly higher. Here's something you may not know. The effects of non-fatal drownings are way more severe than you might think. They include paralysis, brain damage, long-term physical disabilities, mental health issues, and a whole myriad of other issues. And this all happens from what we call a non-fatal drowning, and we're going to get into what that is with Eric. So rather than spill the beans and give too much away, let's roll. Let's get on with Eric. Welcome, Eric. I guess what I wanted to do is I wanted to start by painting the story or telling the story, painting the picture of everything behind those numbers. So when you look at the stats, you look on drownings and so on and so forth, and I was able to find a lot of good resources in the US. But you look at the drownings, and relatively speaking, the numbers are low. And when we ran our water safety series and drowning prevention series in the springtime, the main thesis, the question I want answered was are the numbers low essentially because we have the infrastructure to make sure that people learn how to swim and can avoid the accidents and so on and so forth? And the answer is yes. And then also by default, these services are not prioritized by governments because private industry does such a good job of handling the services where they don't pay any attention to it. I mean, there's not a lot of political capital for them there. Let's be honest, right? There's nothing for them to gain, and that's the problem, right? But that said, when you peel back that initial layer of stats, this is how many people were drowned, this is how many people actually died, and so on and so forth. There's a whole lot of information behind those numbers that the general public does not see, right?
That's right.
So if I look at it, and I just want to kind of lay these out, then I want to let you kind of talk and kind of give your opinion on it. But essentially, when we look at numbers out of the US, numbers out of Ontario. So we had 543 non-fatal drownings last year, right? When we're looking at numbers in the US, we're looking at, of beachgoers, 400 million people going to the beach, and of 400 million, almost 100,000 needing to be rescued, right? And of those that need to be rescued, we know the numbers that have gone to the hospital and the people that died. We don't know is this concept that you brought up, non-fatal drownings, or we're not aware of, is this concept of non-fatal drownings.
Yeah, and on that note, we can only determine at this time how many non-fatal drownings occur based on hospital visits and emergency room visits. It's the actual unknown that I'd be more curious about. How many of those non-fatal pieces were not reported? I think about coming from the camps industry, I'm sure that there are a lot of accidents that actually happen, or folks that actually take in water into their lungs and that are actually treated on their campsite by doctors and nurses that may never see the hospital. So it's only based on hospitalizations and emergency room visits that get us that non-fatal statistic, which is great work done by Tessa Clemens, in Canada, as well as Barb Byers and the Drowning Research Center. We're getting that information, and I know that they're going to grow it out even more. I know globally this is a big issue, but it's also it's many more times the actual fatal drowning statistic. So it's really the concern about, okay, who are almost drowning? What's the age category? According to the Ontario report, it's children and youth. And I'm wondering where the risk factor is for those folks. Like, we hear about stories of kids that swim too far out that start to drown and take in water into their lungs, and they may have to see the hospital. But we know for sure that that the 19-year-olds, for example, males mostly, there's got to be a risk factor if they're the ones visiting the hospital and the emergency rooms. So I would be really interested in the education that needs to happen for this to stop happening, for this non-fatal piece to stop happening, and just educating not only parents but also organizers of programs, or recognizing the signs. How are we incorporating this piece into our lifeguard training? Right. So these are big questions. And then I, as a independent operator, luckily, touch wood, we haven't had any incidences where we've had to send someone to the hospital. But I'm being called in as a private consultant to try and retrain lifeguards after an accident occurs. Luckily, the incidences that I've been part of, the retraining, those kids have been brought back from being unconscious and having stopped breathing. So we've got to go back and retrain the lifeguards. And then if there are patrons involved that witnessed it, who's treating them, and then bringing people back to that swimming facility, the aquatic facility where the accident happened, is key. So there's lots of moving parts, a lot of pieces of this puzzle, and we're basing it on statistics. But having been immersed into retraining as a result of a non-fatal incident, where the victim actually came back, and in some cases are still receiving rehabilitation, and in some cases psychological help for mental health, including their families that might have been part of that. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and I would never wish any of this upon anybody. When it comes to fatal, it's a cut and dried scenario. When it comes to non-fatal, where's the victim at now, and do they have any lasting effects after the fact?
So on that point, how do we break this down in really simple terms for parents and for kids in terms of a definition? What is a non-fatal drowning?
Well, actually, I have it here. Drowning can be fatal or non-fatal. In non-fatal drownings, it's when the respiratory impairment is stopped before death. So death doesn't occur. Non-fatal drowning can result in a range of outcomes from no injuries to serious injuries or permanent disability. It's certainly when one is taking in water, it affects the lungs, and either they go unconscious and stop breathing and need to be brought back. For parents, the most important thing is, even before understanding what the definition is, it's all about them being good, solid water watchers and never losing sight of their children.
The parents being water watchers.
Yeah. And we know that in many cases, some parents can't swim. So maybe this is a wake-up call, knowing that there are many cases in the non-fatal world where luckily people have survived, that we need to barrier off water according to the World Health Organization. And I've talked this story many times. Barrier them off, whether it's a backyard pool or whether it's access to a waterfront, especially for those non-swimmers. The second most important thing is to teach people how to swim and understand the importance of building up some sort of endurance level before they go and swim too far, because we're hearing all kinds of stories of people that swim too far. And then the distractibility piece for parents and anybody that is supposed to be watching children, youth, or adults as a lifeguard or a water watcher. We're hearing more about this. Someone has to be designated to be watching the water without the distractions of the phone. The phone has become a real thing, not only for our drivers, but also for the people watching important places like water. So like you just said, Jason, keeping things simple before they get really complicated and injurious in some cases, is watch out for the distractions. Who's watching and responsible for those children, youth, or adults at the time in the water? The other piece is checking those areas, even if it's a backyard pool, for hazards. There are some people that are slipping in or falling into water. I sit on a couple of committees. One is drownings in supervised settings. That's where maybe lifeguards aren't paying close enough attention, or the supervisor was supposed to be watching and wasn't. And then the other part is unintentional water entry. People are falling into or finding their way into water that they otherwise wouldn't have gone into. So
that might be falling into ice. It might be, walking on a slippery surface and ending up in the pool and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Completely unexpected circumstances.
Yeah. And if we throw the L word into it, for them to be able to get out of those tough situations might be a non-fatal case where they would have had to go to the hospital for a check to make sure that there's not water in their lungs, having struggled.
So like on that point, and you mentioned this before, in terms of like the after effects, the long-term effects of non-fatal drownings, and to your abilities, of course, like, and to, your, what you can speak to. I mean, there are documented cases of severe long-term effects from this, including, brain damage, serious damage to the respiratory system and so on and so forth. And, like, this is truly something that can affect you for life. And this is something that, as I said before, it's about the numbers behind the numbers. It's easy to flash up this many people died and so on and so forth, but it's all the stuff, and what you're talking about here is the stuff you don't see. So I'm wondering what you can add to that discussion, or what you can offer in terms of insights of long-term effects, the long-term effect of non-fatal drownings.
Well, we're seeing people that end up in wheelchairs, people that require, breathing tubes. We're seeing those are the extreme cases. And then we have the other cases where people lived and are living a normal life after the non-fatal event. But from a mental health perspective, they still need to be cared for. Because again, going back into the water situation, will that person who had a non-fatal scenario go back into water, swim again? There's more of a hesitancy. And so people have to be available to kind of retrain people to get back into it. How about a non-fatal event where someone was unconscious, stopped breathing, under the supervision of a lifeguard? The lifeguard or a patron might have brought that person back to life. What are the after effects of that? There's lots of, again, moving parts, and who cares for these people afterwards, and who gets them back into the game. When there's a fatal drowning, that's cut and dried. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And what if they do sustain brain damage, or, as you say, respiratory damage that might require regular doctor's visits or medication? Now we're bringing in a healthcare system where dollars and cents are being used, whether it be taking up a hospital bed or having to pay for regular care. I mean, luckily in Canada, we do have a healthcare program that most likely would take care of these people. In the States, it might be something different, where there's privatization of the hospitalization. So I also be curious to know how many resources are being used after the non-fatal event. And like you said, my expertise only goes to a certain point. I only hear and read about the stories, and then I try and step in as part of a committee member or an operator to make things safer, so that these events don't occur, whether it be through infographics, information we send to our clients, our patrons, our swimmers. And how do we get messages like this out to the community? Well, places like the Canadian Red Cross and the Life Saving Society, Parachute Canada, any injury prevention programs have to help us as operators, and then also educate parents to make sure that these incidences don't occur. So that's really my role in being an advocate in the drowning prevention world.
Yeah, absolutely, fair enough. And like being part of like a strong swim school community in the Toronto area. I mean, like I know you guys are all very active, and like I said, when you brought this up, like I'd never heard the term non-fatal drowning before, and I made the leap that if I haven't heard it, there are a bunch of parents that haven't heard it either. They don't know what it is, right?
For sure.
And then just make the link. Well, either it's like you said, it's cut and dry. It's you drowned or you didn't drown, right?
Right.
Um, and there's a massive gray area with serious side effects there. So, like the stats seem to be the same. Males between 18 and 25, like are still the leading group in Canada. Like we've gotten drowning rates down, because of the work folks like you guys have done. But like the reality is like there's several people like the non-swimmers, weak swimmers that are still at risk of these long-term effects because they go to the beach, they go to the pool, they're not prepared with a safety plan. This concept of water watchers is not a readily adopted concept. It's not something that, like you go to a beach and there's a sign posted saying, have your water watcher, the same way that, we're all trained now to have a designated driver, if people go out. It's the same concept. The idea is the same, right? But
Yeah.
we just haven't prioritized it and valued it, right? So.
Well, also being sheltered in a place like Canada, where we have oceans on either end of the country, such as where you live in Vancouver. But as far as the current goes, I mean, there are places around the world where the surf comes up and it's really unsafe. I personally, as a strong swimmer at the time in 1990, was dragged under literally on the shore in France, and I was basically pulled under. If anyone has ever felt what it's like to have zero control, but is a strong swimmer. So if this is happening to me, and there are currents and hazards, then that's where we actually, like in that particular instance, I might have had to go to the hospital had I taken more water into my lungs. But luckily, my wife came and rescued me and pulled me in. She saw my hand up like a typical person drowning, which is a universal sign. And so that concerns me. And the fact that the non-fatal incidences are 3.6 times the number of fatal incidences in Ontario. Again, I'm waiting on Canadian statistics. Those may have already come out. We still know non-fatal incidences are many times more than fatal. So, like you said, it's something fairly fresh, something pretty new, and it would be interesting to educate the community, parents, teachers, anybody that's willing to listen. And then the other question is, is there a common place that these non-fatal scenarios are happening? We know that most people drown fatally in rivers and lakes. Well, are a lot of the non-fatal incidences happening in those same locations? I'd be curious to see those stats that hopefully will come out in the next year or so. They may already be out, so that might be a part 2 to the non-fatal discussion. And maybe Tessa Clemens and Barb Byers can join in on the conversation because they are the experts in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something for us to keep our eye on and something for us to follow up on and, continue, whether it's through a vessel like this or something else, just try to get the word out that, like these are other safety things for you to pay attention to. But at the end of the day, I mean, like the last year and a half to this pandemic, like it's been really revealing, like the effect of political capital, where it's important. For a politician and where it's not important vis-a-vis like what society needs and so on and so forth, because the trends, drowning trends, they were on an upward trend the last 2 years because of the fact that people didn't have access to information, they didn't have access to lessons and so on and so forth, and you saw the immediate effect of it. Right. So through work that you do, hopefully people will pick up more of a show like this and so on and so forth, and we can continue to get the word out. So to wrap this up, in terms of, like a couple of parting words, we talked about what non-fatal drownings are, right? We talked about that anybody is susceptible to a non-fatal drowning, right? They can happen where you least expect it, slipping into a pool, stepping on thin ice, or whatever the case is, right? What are a couple of final words that you would like to leave with anybody listening?
Well, I'm not here to sell my swim school or swim fins, but I
But
am here.
do
No,
it.
no, I'm not going to do that. But I am here to mention that part of this non-fatal piece, where I heard a story of a 14-year-old that was pushed off a bridge where they were jumping, but a friend came by and pushed the friend off the bridge. I do like to bring up the no push movement that I started many years ago because I was visiting summer camps. This would be a non-fatal piece for sure, where people are just getting tossed in, even by lifeguards. In some of the camps I visited, lifeguards were pushing in the campers as a joke. It only takes 1 second, A, to fall into water, B, be pushed into water, C, to be thrown into this non-fatal piece. It only takes a second. So educating people on not pushing, nopushmovement.com, take the oath and register your name so we could all be part of this injury prevention program, as well as keeping an eye out when you're around water for any hazards and recognizing that there are rules like no swimming at night, don't swim alone. These are basic rules. Yet once you throw things like alcohol or drugs into this, that might actually play a factor in some of this non-fatal stuff. So again, lots of moving parts, lots of puzzle pieces. More to come on this, I'm sure, because research is being done. But I'm so thankful, Jason, that you brought this to the forefront, and hopefully we can get the message out that this is an issue and there are some safety things that we can put in place to make our programs, our backyard pools, and visits to the beach or the waterfronts happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for taking the time to do this and speak on it, and I give credit where credit's due. You were the one that brought this up, and I said, like, this is something we should definitely talk about and communicate it. But as in Canada, as many places are turning to or preparing for winter, ice is going to start forming, and this is one of those points that we just talked about. Whether it's ice fishing and skating on ponds or whatever the case is. We had reports of people trying to play hockey on water catchment ponds that are like they're not they're not safe for stuff like that, right?
Right.
But
And they may not be prepared. They may not have the right safety equipment on. Someone might not have done a proper check on the thickness of the ice.
exactly.
We hear of all kinds of stories of snowmobiles following each other in.
Yeah.
Last year around this time, we were fighting to keep our swimming schools open and swimming lessons ongoing. And I know at least in this province, the Premier just spoke of the fact that he's not interested in closing things down. So hopefully we can keep these programs to learn to swim and education and life-saving programs alive and well so that we can educate people on the non-fatal and ways to protect ourselves and our children and our grandchildren when we're supposed to be watching them.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, hit home the idea. You guys as swim school owners, like, you guys are a fantastic resource for people in your community, the people that you serve. So yes, of course, they can go to the Red Cross and Life Saving Society online, but that you are a physical location where they can walk in, they can get the lessons, they can get the resources, they can get the guidance. And like, you become like the epicenter of that information and that safety message.
That is a messenger job that I'm willing to do.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate your time today. We're going to get this out, and definitely would really appreciate the opportunity to catch up on this when there's more information available on it.
You got it. Good chatting with you, Jason.
Thanks, Eric. A lot. Very much appreciated. This episode was brought to you by Ocean Junction. We've got everything you need for swimming in the pool, lake, and ocean. Check it out today at www.oceanjunction.com. Have a nice day.